My name is Susan Carvalho. I'm Associate Provost for Internationalization, and I'm very pleased to be here to give you an overview of the strategic planning process, and in particular, the trends document, which is a statement about national trends and then the view from UK and where the big challenges are that we need to face and how the strategic plan needs to position us to respond to those. So there aren't very many slides. Many of them are process slides, but then some of them are quite thought-provoking. So I'm going to go through those. I can pause for questions during, but most of the time will be devoted to your comments and input. Primarily on two topics: what's missing that we need to be thinking about and responding to, and is anything here characterized in a way that you would have positioned differently? That's really the overarching questions and the reason for the forum. So I'm stuck here because we're talking to the virtual audience. I know that people are tuned in all over campus for this mega event. So this is a complete overview of the strategic planning process, and you can see that it began in earnest in December, even though we've been talking about it for at least 2 of the 5 years of the last strategic plan, where focus groups and interviews took place, intensive input and planning January through March, and that involved the formulation and the hard work of 6 working groups around the 6 very broad goals that were articulated in the fall, and also benchmarking and summarizing trends. The output in January was the first draft of the document we're talking about now. It's called Understanding Tomorrow, and in shorthand it's the Trends document. It's at the Strategic Plan website, which is written here, and you may have seen it already. It was in the announcement about this forum. At the end of March, which is next week, will be released the second product called See Tomorrow Piñata. And that's, the name is to remind everyone that it's very much a first draft. In other words, it's something that's put out there so that everyone can take a whack at it. But it very much grows out of the Trends document. In other words, Trends document forecasts the Piñata document. So that's why your input on the Trends document is really significant, because the Piñata document needs to respond to the challenges that are in our path. Distribute Piñata and have extensive conversations in April, and then revise it in May when it changes from the Piñata to the strategic plan for presentation to the BOT in June. Okay? And then a big box for implement. So, from the community involvement phase, there were town halls. There were also planning committee members named, 103 people on the planning committee. And then a parallel initiative, not exactly part of the strategic plan, is the Academic Brand Initiative. And that's drawing together many different constituencies to think about the Sea Blue brand, the UK brand, and how we want to position ourselves for the next 6 years. So the total, 785 people, all talking about UK's future 2014 to 2020. The strategic plan videos viewed 1,500 times, so now you all know what you go home and do on YouTube. Planning committee composition, 50% faculty, 36% staff, 14% students. Trying to make sure all constituencies are well represented. These are the focus groups for the community involvement, including the brand direction. I don't think anyone is left out of that. And some more. And the core of the document then is the 9 trends, and these are opportunities and challenges: changing finances, changing purpose of higher education, an environment of greater accountability, increased use of technology, challenging us from all sides, increased internationalization, personal passion, changing undergraduate population, challenges in graduate professional education, and research in an era of declining resources, and changing professoriate. So I'm going to go through each of those and just summarize what the trends document says in case you don't have it memorized. All the conversations about brand and about UK's greatest strength come back to this. What is distinctive about UK? We're one of 8 universities with the breadth and depth of programs on a single campus. And more we're looking to that as a source of strength in attracting faculty, attracting students, and attracting grant dollars. 3 really important things we need to attract. Vibrant new core curriculum, that's UK core, the library system, and the fact that at the heart of our identity is the flagship and land grant identity. Creative partnerships are making us stand out nationally. As you know, the Residence Hall partnership made national news. The Coursera partnership is unique in its focus on college preparation, and the increased focus on philanthropy, which is turning all public institutions into public-private institutions. Increases in quality and diversity, and you'll see this reflected in the trends about the changing student demographics, but this is a priority that we can't lose track of. We have to, the increase in quality has to do with degree productivity, time to degree efficiency, and the increased accountability, scrutiny, performance-based funding, all those phrases that you keep hearing. And diversity, of course, is an imperative for so many reasons. Our service to the state, what we owe to all of the students on our campus. The expansion of the honors program is a major feature that has already taken place and that figures in the strategic plan as we continue to think about how we're going to attract the state's top students to stay in Kentucky, and how we're going to attract an increasing national and international student base. Living learning programs also a distinctive feature of that. If we put in place, now we're planning 19, and the eventual goal of some 80% of our first-year students in living learning communities, that will set us apart as large public institutions. Investments in infrastructure, you've all seen the cranes, you don't need me to tell you about that. But next on the docket is the new student center, expanded student center, completing Chandler Hospital, and the College of Law expansion. As you know, that's all a little tentative today after yesterday's news from the legislature, but we live in hope. Challenges. And again, you can think about the strategic plan needing to respond to these. None of these can be ignored in the strategic plan. So we're very interested in your response to this. The declining share of state budgets, and the net dollars, the raw dollars that are decreasing in terms of state appropriation to UK. Tuition and fees continue to increase, and that brings pressure on accountability and performance indexes, those metrics. So with the rising cost comes the increase in scrutiny. Enrollment in tuition-bearing graduate programs is decreasing. Look at the drop in master's programs. And we had the Education Advisory Board, which is an external higher ed research group, come in and talk to us about the efficiency of master's programs versus doctoral programs. In other words, master's programs are cost-effective, shorter term. Most of the people in them are paying their own way, especially if they lead directly to career advancement, where PhD programs are more expensive, high maintenance, require more faculty attention. And so if you look at our trends where master's degrees are declining and PhD programs are growing, you can see the pinch that graduate education finds itself in at UK. We have to address that. Question is, what is the right way to address it? Fellowships and scholarships remain flat while the number of graduate students continues to increase, which means that a smaller and smaller percentage of our graduate students can be funded. And then there's the question of competitive funding. So how will we address that? That's one of the key questions. What is the sustainable model for graduate education? Shall I pause here for input, because that's a big question? Or or I can keep going and then we'll come back. I can flip back to any of these. Rising competition. Regional competition is a serious issue. We need to compete for the state's top students. The regional institutions are well ahead of us in online offerings, and we can come up with all kinds of reasons why that is. The question is, are we going to let that continue? Are we going to close the gap? Are we going to get ahead? What is the right position for UK in the state in terms of online degree offerings? I remember someone pointing out to me that we have, because of the tuition benefits and the arrangements we have with partner universities, we're paying UK staff tuition to regional institutions so that they can get their degrees from Western and Murray with UK's dollars. Doesn't make sense from a business perspective. So what are we going to do about that? And then Western is ahead of us in the number of international students. That's the case with many regional institutions across the country. It's not a terrible thing, but what are we going to do about that? Do we let the gap widen? Do we close that gap? Out-of-state institutions, if you look at their percentage of out-of-state students, you can see that Alabama enrolls 60% of its students from out-of-state. Ole Miss is up also to, what is that, at the Oxford campus, 58.1% are in-state. And what is our percentage? Are we 20, 25% out of state? 35% out of state?
For this fall, sir, go.
This fall, 35% out of state.
This last year.
32. So do we want to increase our percent of out-of-state students, or do we want to increase the number? The population of college-age children in Kentucky is changing, and this means paying attention to the changing demographics and also the increase in first-gen students and the measures we have in place to ensure their success, as well as protecting the scholarship opportunities to ensure that equity of opportunity that a land-grant institution has at its heart and soul. Shrinking globe, national growth in international students. We don't see those trend lines here, although our numbers have gone up. Growth in UK students going abroad. I'm happy to report that next year's numbers will be well over 1,000. So that's a really significant increase since 09-10 due to curriculum integration efforts of the Education Abroad Office. So we're happy about that. Substantial growth in the percent of UK credit hours taken online, even though our degree offerings are not expanding fast online. This goes back to the question of UK's identity as a multidisciplinary collaborative institution. There was just an article in today's Chronicle about how public institutions can attract quality faculty away from private institutions, and it was around this question of cross-campus collaboration. That state universities tend to be more broad, foster more collaboration across college boundaries, across department boundaries, positioning themselves for big collaborative grant dollars and exciting intellectual opportunities that aren't available at more siloed institutions. So clearly this is something that everyone's talking about. The article was about City University of New York that had just drawn a power couple from Duke and someone else. I don't remember the details. But they talked about, they called it the Dow of LeBron. LeBron James went to Miami because there he could surround himself with the people who would make a star a bigger star. And that's the way we can position ourselves to faculty across the country. And also the grant dollars. But are we taking advantage of it? That's the key question at the bottom. How do we overcome the challenges of a siloed campus? We know how siloed we are. Collaboration does take place, but not enough. How can we make more of that happen by 2020? And the big federal grants are all interdisciplinary, increasingly interdisciplinary now, so we need to be moving in that direction as well. The prioritization of research that impacts the community matters a lot to our stakeholders, all of our stakeholders, and so there is nationally and also at UK an increased focus on translating research from the theoretical to the practical. Solving real-world problems is a phrase that's in the Chronicle every day. It's every time you hear the higher education conversations federally, they're all talking about whether higher education research is solving real-world problems. And funding agencies obviously are prioritizing that. And a renewed focus on accountability. I mentioned this before, with higher costs comes a higher degree of answering questions about where the money goes. Are we as efficient as we can be? Are we as productive as we can be? Do our students really get those jobs that we say they're going to get after they graduate? Are we keeping track of that? So the concept of employee accountability also comes up in this. And that has to do with tracking activity and with performance evaluations and how accurate are our DOEs to the real work that faculty do. You've all heard about the initiatives in Texas that try to quantify productivity of faculty by how many students they teach and how many hours they spend doing this and that. And we're not there, but the trend is evident, and we need to position ourselves to have an answer to the question, how do faculty apportion their time, and how does that relate to the increases in cost? What's the benefit to Kentucky? What's the benefit to all your students? We know that those benefits are there, but we have to articulate them in this strategic plan. So next steps, the planning committee, the 6 working groups are drafting strategies, tactics, and metrics. We'll all get a chance to take a whack at that and continue to have conversations. But your input now is formative for that document. That's why this meeting is timely. So back to the 2 questions. What's missing in terms of challenges or strategic directions that need to be in our path? And is anything missing or different from the way we're addressing these 9 items? And I can talk more about any one of these 9 items. And these are the 9 chapters of the Trends report that is online. So with that, you have a microphone button in front of you, and there is an echo here. Each individual person thinks that they can hear, but in the aggregate, there's an echo. So please use the microphones. So can I open the floor? And if you'd like to say your name and where you're from, that will help us understand the question. And I'm not the only one answering questions, but I'm a good listener. I read the report, and between us all, we can address questions. Yes?
I'm Joe Chappelle in the Department of Pharmaceutical Sciences, and I have, maybe it's a comment followed by a question, and the comment is that I sort of feel like we continue to capitulate to what I would call the obvious trends. I've looked at the trend report. I'm not particularly invigorated by the report. I wish it were more creative and innovative in what was being proposed for us. The question really, I think, that is troubling for a lot of faculty is the tension, I'll call it, between scholarship and education. We're hearing a tremendous amount about the importance of education for the financial well-being for the campus, but I would hazard to guess that there's a very significant proportion of the faculty that have tremendous angst about the lack of dialogue that they hear at the upper administrative levels about scholarship. What is scholarship? What does that really do for us as an institution? And I'll leave it at that, and maybe there'll be other participants here that will want to comment, but I think there is some tension there that this document certainly doesn't address sufficiently.
question, well, the third part, you said, what is it? What does it do for us as an institution? There has to be a third part of that. What does it do for us as a state? Because if we don't apply it, it'll fall on deaf ears. And I don't know if we can make those ears hear. So there are two approaches to this kind of dissonance or disjuncture between what faculty would say about what they do and what the state taxpayers and legislature would say about what the university does. And so we have to talk to each other. And that means talking in applied and translational terms. I think we have a harder time with the pure theoretical side. But we have to think about how to package that in ways that can be heard in the state. Because we are taking taxpayer money, and we are charging the state's kids. So how do we talk about that? Do you have any initial thoughts on that?
That microphone, I don't know if it's really working over here. But I would just say that there isn't sufficient dialogue coming from all arenas, all spheres of influence to debate this. I would suggest that the majority of the faculty think of UK as being the flagship research institution in the state of Kentucky, and we forge the frontiers for innovation and creativity that will translate long-term to the benefit to the Commonwealth and to the rest of the nation. But it's a very limited amount of, I'll call it, apparent appreciation of that perspective from, I'm sorry, I'm calling it upper administration. That's a terrible, I hate those terms, but I'm just saying that dialogue, we're hearing a lot about the importance for undergraduate education. I don't think anybody discounts that, but in the same breath, I have to say, there needs to be a better appreciation for scholarship. And I don't mean, the hard sciences versus the social sciences. I'm saying across the board, there's great scholarship in many pockets around campus, and I think those need to be more accentuated as we go forward. That's a way that we truly distinguish ourselves within the Commonwealth to the public.
And as part of that breadth question, if we talk about those collaborations, what do they result in? What kind of outputs, to use a quantifiable word. And the other question with that is, every time we say research, are we going to say external dollars with it? Or how are we going to talk about the other part? Because it is fairly easy if we're going to talk about the external dollars. We could show graphs that show that an increasing percentage of our budget is on those external dollars. We could show federal funding success, especially NIH success. So we can do that, and we need to do it. That's a good point, but that's an easier omission than the other, which is, what about research that costs money, that's important to do for what we provide to our students and to the Commonwealth? That is a harder nut to crack. Thank you. Other comments? Yes.
Joe stands as Exhibit A, or as Exhibit UK, to reconcile that, because not only do you do seminal work in terms of R&D, a few minutes before our session here, you were speaking with great erudition about genetics and society. So there's the answer. No charge.
Exhibit A. That's a good point. Other input? What challenges would you have put in this report? Yes, ma'am. Sue.
Hi, I'm Sue Roberts from the College of Arts and Sciences. I read the report, and I think the challenges are fine, seem to be identified interestingly and raise some interesting questions. I guess I'm concerned to know more about the process, because your presentation was very helpful, but many of the the charts and graphs that you showed, some of the points that you raised were not in the trends report. That report had a series of different, representations of each of these 9 issues. So, and in the trends report, we didn't hear anything about the education advisory board study of grad education. We just got very rough approximations of trends. So I found the trends report itself quite light. It was sort of research light and kind of assertion heavy, had a lot of big claims that didn't seem to be backed up by research. So it sounds like there has been research, it just wasn't presented maybe in the trends report. But if that's really going to be foundational for real strategic planning and really difficult choices about where to place resources and where to take resources from, then I just feel we need better foundational research than I saw in the trends report.
That's a very good point. One thing I noticed this time rereading it is that a lot of the graphs are front-loaded in the first pages instead of being in the sections that relate to each of the chapters, the trends. And some of the graduate slides are there, although not that EAB slide, and that I think would be a really valuable addition to it that talks about the average cost of educating an undergraduate, a master's student, and a doctoral student. And we can look at adding that and certainly making sure that it shows up in the next. I don't know if graphs are in the Pinata document, but I think we need to look at that.
Is the Pinata document already written?
Pinata document is drafted and the working groups have it. So they are taking the first whack to make, because the Pinata document first needs to reflect what they have been talking about for 2 months. So that's what the draft is. And as soon as they feel like it's a reasonable representation of the conversations they've been having, the priorities they've been putting out there, then it will be public for the month of April. So it's to be released April 7th. But this input is coming at a time that does make a difference for those drafts. Other input? Thoughts? Worries? Yes?
I don't know if this will work. That's right. I'm Becky Dutch from biochemistry. And one of the questions that's been going on in our department is you put up the challenges in graduate professional education showing a decrease in master's and an increase in PhD. But actually in College of Medicine we have exactly the flip-flop and a dramatic decrease in PhD programs. So one of the things I was wondering is, as they go into the strategic plan on that side, are they breaking it down in terms of discipline and discussion? Because it strikes me that we probably have a wide range of the needs and issues in graduate programs across campus, and I'm a little worried about sticking them all in one box and saying they all have the same problems, the same issues, because I'm not sure that they do.
It's a good point, especially about the distinction between graduate and professional programs. There is a graph on page 67, my copy has very small numbers, of doctoral programs by college. But there may not be enough of that parsing. Many master's programs were eliminated because we rolled them into doctoral programs. I know that happened in College of Arts and Sciences, so it looks like a drop in master's programs, but that's because people are coming straight in from doctorate, where they used to do a more scaffolded set of degrees, and that also needs to be looked at. Of course, when I hear College of Medicine, I think about the MD program, and you are talking about the PhD
No, yeah, so for
numbers.
instance, our incoming PhD program has about half the number of students it did 5 years ago. So we've got flummox going on. We're not at 37% increase.
One of the statistics that is in the report is that there were 10 schools have announced plans to open medical programs. Is that since 2000? Anyone remember that statistic? I know that statistic that also said that the number of pharmacy programs has increased by 48% since 2005. I think it said since 2010 schools have announced plans to open a medical campus. So,
Right, but that's MDs and PhDs and masters would all be really different. And I guess that's one thing I just want to make sure, as this goes towards the plan, that the needs of master's programs, PhD programs, MD programs, law programs are all going to be different. And I want to be very careful about lumping them into one big group and treating them all the same, because I think in the end, we just won't meet anybody's needs if we do that.
There's also a big difference in the way they're funded, and you're right, we can look more closely at which ones are funded on grants versus which ones are funded out of the UK scholarship pool, and that will add some distinction to some blurry lines. Thank you. Yes?
I'm Mike McCall from biochemistry. I attended a meeting this morning where somebody talked about graduate programs, and they gave it a term that I liked, connective tissue. I think the focus on this has been on the costs of graduate education and not on the benefits that they give. Graduate students do teach, they do most of our research, and that would collapse if graduate programs continue to shrink. And so I think the graduate programs need to look a little bit more holistically, not just as a cost, but to the benefits they provide to this university as well.
That's an excellent point. We also need to be looking at the employability of our graduate degree recipients, because there's a lot of national discussion about programs getting larger than the job market will accept, so that large universities can meet their teaching and research needs. And I'm not sure that's true for UK. And it's one of those cases where we need to look at a national trend and then test whether that is happening at UK or whether our programs are the right size to meet not only our needs, but the needs of the graduates, of the degree recipients, and the job market. And that, too, needs to come into the conversation. Thank you. I saw a hand. Yes?
Diane Snow, undergraduate education. My question relates to the pipeline and to high-impact practices, and it relates both to the issue of scholarship and to our graduate pool. And that is that we talk about high-impact practices for student success, but yet I don't see as much emphasis on some of them as I would like to see. For example, undergraduate research, we know is one of those practices, and we need to put a lot more effort into that and into the pipeline of students coming from areas below that to generate their interest and let them know that those kinds of opportunities are available. I'd like to see much more emphasis on that. I'm seeing bits and pieces that are very good in and of themselves, but from a campus top-down approach, it would be nice to really value that and show that up front and center. Are there efforts toward that more than I'm seeing?
Well, there is the honors growth, which I think does tie directly into those high-impact opportunities. I know Ben's here. There you are.
I'm on the work group. Becky's on the work group too, that's looking at undergraduate education. And indeed, we're looking at various high-impact practices to make recommendations in the strategic plan that there be investments in that. That would include education abroad, undergraduate research, service learning, and other things like that. I think it's a good point that you're bringing up here, Diane, that this document that we're looking at today is trying to provide that broad overview of more or less the state of higher education. In our strategic planning documents that come out of the work groups, the piñata that you're talking about will be the mechanisms that we try to address those on a local level here at UK, but connected to those larger discussions nationally that's in this document. So you'll see that, you should see that in that piñata document that's as soon as it's ready to be released.
Yes.
Joe Chappelle again. So I'm going to challenge, just for the sake of stimulating a little consideration, I'm going to challenge the internationalization emphasis. Not because I'm opposed to it, but because I think it's, again, presented it's capitulating to a very common notion out there without what I would call rigor that we were someone asked about for documentation. So I do have a modest association with Ole Miss, and I know they have a large international population. I'm not sure it has helped that institution raise the intellectual fabric of the institution, the quality of the education that the students are getting overall. And so when internationalization occurred, and it really started probably 20, 25 years ago, where institutions went out to very specific foreign institutions that had very high achieving, high-level accomplished students and recruited those students. Now we're basically doing something that I don't know if it has all the rigor behind it that I would like for the student body in total to benefit from. Certainly it's great for diversity, all those things for our students. It's great for our students to go to other places, no doubt about it. But you know, this is in some ways I challenge this because I think it is trying to go out and get bodies to fill seats that have dollars to help float the boat. And I'm not sure it has sufficient rigor behind it and demographics, long-term wise, to support the idea or the notion.
Of a dropping college-age population in the state?
No, the internationalization, we're tending to think that we're going to improve our student body with an international, with having more international students. You showed the demographics for, and you mentioned University of Mississippi, Ole Miss as an example. I challenge that as saying that I'm not sure that that has done anything to raise the intellectual stature of the institution. It may even have been compromising the intellectual status of the institution. And I'm sorry to have, I'm trying to be...
It's okay, I don't take it personally.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just, I think it's already been brought up. What is the rigor behind the statistics that we're looking at?
Right, and that's a tough correlation. I think what you're thinking about 20, 25 years ago when we would select those students, that was at the graduate level. And so this bringing undergraduates from abroad is a more recent trend.
No, and for a lot of premier institutions, those that we would call in the upper ranks, they have been doing it for a long time. And they've been doing it in a very selective way with very high achieving undergraduate students that come and participate. We're very late to this game, and we're like everybody else, so it looks just like everybody else. It's not distinctive in my opinion, and that's why I made the introductory comments I made earlier, that we just seem to be followers, not leaders.
Trying to think what kind of data would push that. Retention numbers for the international demographic, grades for the international demographic,
Sure.
something like that. I'm just kind of searching.
Yeah, academic performance would help, certainly.
We could add to that where our international undergraduates go for graduate school as well. You can look at some of our engineering programs where they're going to University of Texas, Austin, Purdue University. So what graduate schools are they going to as well?
Karen Slaymaker, International Students Hospital. That's a good point. Placement and academic performance of international undergraduates.
Yep.
Good point. Thank you. If you think of anything else, send it my way. Even if it's a statistic that proves that they're not improving the level, then it's important to put it all out there. That's part of the rigor. Thank you. If anyone else thinks of what are your questions about data around international students or any of the other points here, please send those, see tomorrow at UKY, is that right? See tomorrow at uky.edu. We'll go to the working group that is connected with Vince Kellenshop's doing all the benchmarking and data number crunching. So please feel free, you can email me anytime, of course, but I'll be forwarding to them. So if you think of what your questions are, like, how many dollars are attached to this kind of initiative, or what's the real cost of that, please send those questions in, because we do, it's the responsibility of the Strategic Planning Committee to provide the data that backs up the claims. And I think that's a common thread here, but we need you to ask the questions at this stage. Yes?
I'm Tom Clayton, Arts and Sciences. On the internationalization theme, increasing the number of international students at UK is only one part of the picture. Sending UK students abroad is another part of it, and just increasing the global mentality, the internationalization mindset of students here is another part of it. So, so I understand your concern, but it's a big picture. My question, I guess, about internationalization, to use another of Joe's vocabulary items, about tension. What's the tension between internationalization, as Joe described it, that would be increasing the international student population here, and some of the other elements that came up here about Kentucky students? Is there a tension between increasing the number of international students that would potentially displace Kentucky students? Another part of it that certainly needs to be thought of is internationalization in that way of increasing the UK population of international students means that we need to build an infrastructure to support those students. That's certainly a pitfall that we don't want to go into. We don't want simply to chase the students, chase the dollars. There are costs associated with those dollars, and we certainly see that in my office. I'm the director of the Center for English as a Second Language. We see that throughout the campus of units that are happy to have international students, but then see the additional responsibilities that come with that. So I think there's all kinds of tensions in here. I think I was maybe aware of those tensions a little bit more because of my position here than I would have been if I had simply read the document. So if there's a way to bring those to the fore, that would be the suggestion that I would make.
Thank you. I think there's no question that the state is watching how we treat the state students as we turn to out-of-state and international students. They're counting. And their proposals for formulas for funding, et cetera, are tied to the in-state students. So there's a message there, and there's definitely attention. Yes?
Pat Burkhart, College of Nursing. As a follow-up to that, I have a concern about transfer students, especially with selective programs. So for example, in the College of Nursing, we have too many students applying to the sophomore year, the professional program, for the number of seats that we have. So should we take our own UK freshmen, or should we look at transfer students? So there's a tension there as well. Kentucky students versus non-Kentucky students. UK students that paid tuition their freshman year as pre-nursing majors. So it may be that transfer students, for example, is a good idea, but one size doesn't fit all, similar to what was just said about international students. So.
This would be a good time to request some data reports on the performance of transfer students versus non-transfer students to help the college make those kinds of determinations for itself as well. But you're very right that nursing and pharmacy as two examples, and maybe business also, the majors with a narrow gate have significant impact on our retention number. And The retention number is a key part of that accountability, performance-based funding, et cetera, besides that it's expensive in and of itself. So these are really important questions. Do we keep opening the gate wider at the first year transfer level while the gates stay narrow to particular programs that those students are pointed towards? And what happens to them when they get to that narrow gate? It's a really important question. So if you can think about data that would help the college articulate that, I think a lot of that is going to end up being a college decision. But right now you have this central data machine to help you. So could you send a question for all the kinds of number crunching that need to go into that?
Yeah, we're actually looking at some predictive modeling. Good, in terms of admissions.
What else? Yes, Sue.
I'll go again if no one
Yeah.
else.
You get it, Tom.
On the issue of the graduate education, I second the comment from back there that I think it needs to be way broken out, in order to take into account the very different nature of graduate programs across campus. And funding in the Trends report was just lumped in as scholarships, and I couldn't personally tell whether that included teaching assistantships, research assistantships. I had no idea what all was in there. But they're very different things. I mean, teaching assistants and research assistants work 20 hours a week for the university, and they produce a great deal of value in doing so. So I think any of those metrics for graduate education need to be way disaggregated to be helpful. So I hope they are in the Piñata. And then on the accountability issue, it's interesting how that seems to almost immediately go to a focus on faculty accountability. And that's fine. I mean, everybody should be accountable, but there are other units and other types of persons on campus who also should be accountable.
Right, I meant to mention, and I may have just flown by, when I said performance evaluations, I was thinking of staff. But the staff levels, grades, how it is when a staff person tries to move up, sometimes it feels like as soon as someone gets good in a position, the only way they can grow is to leave that position, and then you're training someone else, the salaries that go with that. That's all part of the accountability. And then the retention numbers are really institutional accountability more than faculty accountability. The placement of graduates, retention, productivity, and then where the dollars go. So all of that is also not just that measuring of faculty, but the accountability thing is everywhere. And that's, I think the Piñata document has a lot of metrics in it, and that's the reason, because we have to prove the impact of everything we do. We can't just explain it, we have to demonstrate it in ways that we think are measurable. But that is good. We need to make sure that's brought out.
Well, when you combine it with the question.
Other kinds of jobs. So,
Have you seen those articles like, can the dissertations be defended?
Right.
Good.
So this is an issue I'm not sure is on the radar as much maybe as it should be, preparing graduate students for careers, because we have a stuck career center for undergraduates with no career center of sorts for graduate students. Traditionally, that's been the realm of the departments, but many faculty members find it difficult to advise students who are going outside faculty work or directly into research.
Right, because they don't actually sometimes, like me, know anything about that. Students, graduate students would come to me and say, what can I do besides become you? And I know some interesting people, but I don't know how they got where they are. Is that in the conversation about the Career Center review, Ben?
Yeah, it came up in the external review of the Career Center about it. The Stucker used to provide some limited career counseling for graduate students, and that was lost in budget cuts several years ago. But it has reemerged about the need to do that. But as with many things, it comes down to the ability to pay for it.
It's a very good point. And I think it leads to conversations that have to happen at the department level about the kinds of students that you accept, and then how many graduate and what kinds of careers they're pointed towards, which in part is reflected by where your recent graduates have gotten jobs.
I think directly to the point here, the question is anyone here on the work group that's looking at graduate education? If not, then we need to ask them, is there a discussion there in that work group about having a part of the strategic plan that addresses this? In the same way that there's discussion in undergraduate education about the high impact practice.
I'm not on the work group, but I have been reading the documents that they've been looking at, and that's actually one of the key strategies that they're looking at is a focus on graduate student success after they graduate. So it's a really central concept in what they've been looking at.
Hannah Eddy and Austin Rose. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Randolph Hollingsworth in undergraduate ed, and I really appreciated your adding into at the very beginning about the conversation that also has to take place with Kentuckians as a whole. It's not just conversation amongst ourselves or within our disciplines. Those are all important, but also how do we talk with Kentuckians? And in the newspaper today, I think Tom Evelyn had a very powerful statement about how Kentucky is changing or not changing or is reinforcing systems that I think greatly impact not only our student populations. We have changing undergraduate populations, changing professorate. How do we acknowledge within that also the changing of Kentucky? Or our conversations to make sure that we understand what changes Kentucky is undergoing. How do we reach out? How do we measure those things? How do we know when a graduate student who hasn't graduated yet is searching for a job and maybe 10 years later is still searching for a job? And they want to live here. And we want to encourage them to live here. Because it's an awesome brain power that we've helped to build.
Right, but we like to talk about it as educating Kentucky's workforce, so if they're still looking for jobs, we can't drive that point home. But I think the kinds of jobs they're getting and the ways that they're benefiting the state needs to be documented, highlighted, and showcased.
And so there's an interchange. So like Bluegrass Tomorrow, the Higher Ed Consortium, is an avenue for discussion about these issues, especially in this service area of UK. And I was just curious how the wheel allows for that sort of flexibility, that as Kentucky changes, how do our conversations change?
How is the goal worded that's about the state and outreach? Of the 8 goals?
Have a meaningful impact on the Commonwealth and the community.
Thank you. Have a meaningful impact on the Commonwealth and the community. When the 6 goals were outlined last fall, that's one of them, and that's the working group that needs to be addressing this. And so your input will go to them.
So if I say, I had a great impact on you, is that good enough then?
That's right.
Oh, okay.
Then your impact will be passed to that group to make sure they are looking at a changing state. And so we think connecting to Bluegrass Tomorrow would be a way for them to get.
Well, that's just one channel, for
Input.
example. And UK tends not to be at the table there. So the idea of having those conversations with business leaders that are faculty-led or are student-led, it allows them to see what good are we.
And that particular working group has been really involved in having those conversations with the community, both here in Kentucky and all across the nation and really the world. If Susan, maybe you could go back to the slide that lists all the different people that they've, yes, that one. So you can see all the groups that the groups have talked to so far, and they're continuing to have conversations. Just today, we were talking to Amos Jones, who's a diversity consultant. So they really are trying to get out into the community and talk to a lot of people and learn from different groups.
I know the predicted doubling of the college-age Latino population is a factor in the Pinata document. is addressed, and it's also mentioned in the trends document. Yes?
Beth Garvey, Chair of the Department of Microbiology and Immunology. So one of the questions I have has to do with finance, and I'm wondering if there's been any look at how we do in terms of charitable donations to the university compared to benchmarks. And the reason I ask that is that I know that the institutions that I attended lobby me very hard every year, twice a year, 3 times a year, not even from the university level, but certainly there, but always also from the college and the department level for donations. And that, just in the time that I've been at the University of Kentucky, it seems to me that's a weakness that we've had in our development. And so I didn't see any data on that. I'm wondering if it's been looked at.
I know there was a statement about the 37% increase in development funding, but I don't know if that's...
But compared to our benchmarks, I mean, a 30% increase, 37% increase is not much, maybe still not very much.
Yeah, that's a good point. Increase from what to what, and how does it compare with benchmarks? We should add that data.
It's in the periodic document.
Is it?
And it's pretty explicit.
I can offer that I give to a number of organizations across the campus outside of my immediate area, and I am heavily solicited on an annual basis, equal to all my previous institutions. So I feel there is some very serious efforts in that regard. But I have to say, I'm not giving huge sums of money to anybody. So, but I try to give a pittance and spread the wealth around a little bit. So.
Clearly enough to have attracted their attention.
Yeah, I mean, they're I definitely get calls weekly from the different entities on campus that go out and raise funds.
I'm wondering about particularly getting hold of our graduates from the professional level on down. Many of us, I'm sure, make charitable donations to the university, but we have graduates all over the place, and I'm not sure that the graduates out of my department are followed, quite frankly, so I don't know if anybody even knows where they are. We do, but do you? I mean, as a university, I don't know.
Yeah, actually, if you email ctomar@uky.edu, I have a whole presentation from Mike Ritchie that has information on benchmark. I can't remember all the facts and figures, but I have all the benchmark information, all the information on how we're doing compared to other people, how we've done over time, and I'd be happy to send that to you. You can just email me the information. And that's also in the pinata document that the groups have been working on, the benchmarking information.
Great.
Thank you. Final points? All right, well, these comments will all go straight back to either the working groups or the people working on the drafts, and I hope we can address them at the next stage. I don't know if this document will have another version or if it will be in the pinata document. We're steaming ahead, but really appreciate your input, and thank you for being here until 5 o'clock. Thank you.